It's September 27th and a little bit later in the evening. I last talked about Sue, who was the visitation monitor, the second visitation monitor, who wrote the majority of the visitation notes that were of the visits between me and my son. And I said something, I will try to remember to make a note of this about my last post that I just made, and or last video clip, which will either be the one before this, or maybe the one next, or one after, before the one before, like two of them back, because I said something about, and this is when I was in Canada, when I was talking about Sue, and I said Canada, but I meant Birch Bay. So, if that sounds weird, or sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about, it's because I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't realize I just said Canada, and I meant to say Birch Bay. So, that, was when I was having those visitations. The other thing that occurred was, well, I tried to find a lawyer at that time. I was looking for a private attorney, and I was frantic. And I was also wondering if there's any law firm that might help me as well. I spent the majority of my time emailing lawyer after lawyer after law firm after law firm. I think that I probably emailed every single law firm and lawyer in the entire state of Washington. I don't believe I missed any of them. And I later emailed some of them again, so I know that some of them were contacted by me maybe 1 or 2 years apart for the same kind of inquiry. I spent an enormous amount of time trying to find help for this situation. And my parents at the time said yes, they would help with a private attorney. But then the one that I ended up going to, I didn't realize was going to be a conflict of interest. I had no idea. I mean, the first person that I actually talked to and sat down with at an office, I think was Canadian, and he didn't like me. He wasn't, he was really a little bit hateful towards me, but he did want to talk to me. It was kind of like he wanted to find out a little bit more, and he did not say he was Canadian. I had that feeling. Or maybe he was dual admitted. I don't know how that works. There was something that was Canadian about him. A little more than just like my idea that he was Canadian. And possibly he said that he had lived in Canada first for a little while, or he lived there for a while and then he came over here, or he was a Canadian citizen but then he got his law degree in Washington State. He was in Blaine. He wasn't in Birch Bay. He was in the town of Blaine, which is right there on the border. And that's, of course, where all these people are coming across, back and forth. And he had blonde hair. I went to his offices, and he was the first person I talked to. He said, he looked at some of my documentation somewhere, and he did say, he did reiterate, I sort of felt like he wasn't working with me at all, but I did wonder if possibly he was giving me some correct information again, in the sense of his telling me that if I went to Wenatchee, I'd probably I might be thrown into a mental institution, because he did say something about that there were accusations of paranoid schizophrenia, or maybe I told him that I saw that on the documents in Canada, and then I believed that I was defamed in that way by the United States. So he thought that that was a problem, and he didn't want to represent me. And then I know by the time I left, he didn't look like he liked me. And maybe I saw him later in town, and he didn't look like he liked me. Maybe he checked on me, and he decided he, for some reason, had something against me. So I had sort of a weird feeling from him. Although at the very start, I thought he was open to taking my case. The rest of the time, I literally sent out over 300, 400 possibly 500. It sounds like an exaggeration. I mean, it really does. I type about, at that time, as well as now, I pretty much typed about 60 words a minute. And so I would basically go to an Oregon State Bar or to the Hubbell, Martindale Hubbell site. Went to a lot of different Find a Lawyer websites. I looked up every single lawyer that I could look up that had anything to do with civil rights, international law, child matters, custody, family law, divorce, because I thought maybe it might involve children. Anything that even slightly or remotely touched on it, I contacted them. If it was a huge law firm that did a lot of different kinds of things, I contacted them. I finally even contacted people that are adversarial, that typically work, that work on the opposite side of the fence type of a deal, because I thought, well, sometimes a lawyer works for one group and then they like to switch sides. Sometimes someone will recruit someone from one side and have them switch sides because they have so much knowledge of the other side. And lawyers will do that. I mean, it's not uncommon. And so I literally, I must have sent, I want to say I sent closer to like literally 500 individual emails. I didn't send just group emails. I mean, I didn't copy a bunch of law firms all at once. I sent individualized emails, and then I also did send a few group emails. I tried everything. I also contacted the state, like people who try to help CPS, who fight CPS. I contacted the ombudsperson. I contacted human rights. Everything that I could think of. And my most immediate need was to have a lawyer help me get my son back. So that's what I focused on. And I basically remember sitting down and working from morning until noon, eating lunch, and then working from my lunchtime break until night, sending out email after email after email. I then even branched out into other states and tried to see if anyone was able to even represent someone from a different state. You have no idea how many lawyers there are until you start emailing all of them. And I was trying to explain my situation and what had happened with my son. It was pretty complicated. So it wasn't like I was crying, sleeping on the couch for a long time, or like I was emailing friends or looking for dates or surfing the net. I had I believe around that time I later started watching a little bit of the politics, later when I was at a house where they had a TV, but when I was on my computer I didn't really look up the news that much. It was just lawyer after lawyer after lawyer after lawyer. And then I sent a ton of emails to my parents. I mean, I felt that they didn't know everything that had happened. They had no idea. They didn't know. I mean, they went by what they were being told. And what Marie Scanlon was telling them is, well, your daughter was arrested in Canada because she was disruptive in court. I wasn't even arrested in court, or I wasn't disruptive in court either. So my parents were hearing all kinds of weird things. They were hearing weird versions of the truth. Or weird versions of a lie, actually. And I don't think my parents, even as much experience as they have, living in this world and in life, I don't even think they believed that many people could be that horrible and could lie that much. I think that possibly my mother trusted Marie Scanlon. Maybe. I don't know for sure if she was just saying that she did because she thought she had to and felt compelled in some way. Or if she really did think that just because Marie Scanlon was supposedly a Christian, that it wasn't possible for her to do the horrible things she was doing. So I was trying to explain what had happened, the situation, to my parents as well, and attempting to get help, see if they would help me with getting a private attorney. But out of all these different attorneys, maybe a couple of them responded saying that they could help it with a retainer only. Finally, I found somebody in Bellingham, I believe. And I don't know. I guess he must have responded to an email I was going to say, I don't know how I got to Bellingham. I think that I took a bus because I didn't have my car. So I believe I had to take a bus, one of the buses that left very infrequently, or get a ride somehow. And, I was working a little bit, so I had just a tiny bit of money to pay for something like that. But, not much, not anything else. I mean, I didn't buy anything else for myself. It was kind of like me, a couple changes of clothing, curling iron, just a small little, tiny little bag of makeup. Like one mascara, one foundation, and one lipstick or lip gloss, and that was it. And maybe a comb for my hair. I mean, I had really nothing with me. And my son's diaper bag, which I was carrying around everywhere as a purse. So, I made it over to Bellingham, I guess, after this. I made contact with an attorney who said that he would talk to me. So I met with him. I liked his secretary. I really, again, loved, it really doesn't matter where the law firm is, if it's about the law, not the location. It was a cute little old-fashioned house, really neat 1920s bungalow. Really great solid wood floors, little built-ins everywhere. Really very charming. And his secretary seemed to be very understanding. I really liked his secretary, at least to start with. I thought she seemed to be very helpful, understanding, and believed every word that I said. And then I met him, and he seemed very helpful too. And then I found out he was a Navy attorney. He was a naval attorney, like for the military. He was JAG, which is, I forget what JAG stands for, but it's a military acronym for lawyers that work for the military. It's like Judicial Advocate General or something like that. And I know I'm probably screwing it up, but something like along those lines. And I think that I read somewhere that JAG is pretty much specific to the Navy, that only the Navy has that legal side. But he had like 20 years military experience, if I'm correct. And part of that time he worked as a JAG attorney, and then he was now in his private practice. And he reviewed what I was telling him, and I wrote a statement and everything. I probably didn't include like the worst of the worst and talk about completely the torture level, because I knew it sounded crazy, and unless I was talking to a scientist who dealt with some of these things, I didn't want someone to automatically be thrown off by not understanding what I was talking about. And because he was military, he did understand some of the politics a little more, I could tell. But then when I started talking about the FBI, he didn't want to go into that, and he said he didn't want to get into anything that had to do with the FBI again. And so then he signed up to take my case. I mean, I believe that we did have signatures on papers. And he signed up for it. My parents paid like $1,000 for his services, and that was to start. It was like I saw him once or twice. I saw him one time, and he filed one document in the court to announce, certain things, and spent some time talking to people. But then after that, out of the blue, right before the first hearing, he said to me, "Why don't you just go on your own?"